If it's one thing man has always been proud of, it's himself. Our intellect, advancement, and absolute dominance of our environment has led us to live relatively comfortable, carefree lives. In August 2005, mankind knew fully well that Hurricane Katrina was going to hit New Orleans. We knew Katrina's path, her speed, and when she would strike. Of course, that same man felt that a piece of plywood on a window would be fine. Because in August 2005, a man-made engineering disaster occurred where the levees and flood walls surrounding New Orleans failed, resulting in flooding in about 80% of the city, and was estimated to have been responsible for about 2/3 of the city's death toll of 1,500. All of the knowledge in the world didn't seem to do us much good, because man, as we so often do, brought about our own demise. Katrina merely exploited it.
There were three main parties responsible for constructing the New Orleans levee system: the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the Orleans Levee District, and the Mississippi River Commission. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the world's largest public engineering organization. They consist of U.S. Army military leadership and approximately 35,000 civilians who are basically entrusted with designing and constructing major projects for the Army and Air Force, environmental cleanup programs on lands owned by the Department of Defense, regulating wetland development under the Clean Water Act, and providing engineering and construction assistance to a variety of organizations. But most importantly, in relation to our discussion, the Corps was charged with the implementation, construction, and maintenance of the water-related civil works project. The Orleans Levee Board also played an important role in the levee construction. They oversaw the Orleans Levee District by supervising the levee and floodwall system in Louisiana. Now, in the earlier times, the OLD was responsible for developing and selling land in order to raise money to improve the levees over the years. On the other hand, the Mississippi River Commission was charged with research and so provided policy and work recommendations in the areas of flood, control, and navigation. This commission consisted of 3 officers from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 3 civilians, and 1 officer from the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. Even though these qualified organizations were charged with the responsibility of constructing a stable levee system, the floodwalls and levees failed, with some collapsing well below design thresholds. After Katrina, the American Society of Civil Engineers called the flooding of New Orleans the worst engineering catastrophe in U.S. history.
So after the disaster, several expert civil engineers and reporters went out to investigate the factors that led to the disaster, which contends that fault should go to the Corps of Engineers. Now, the Corps of Engineers in defense says that the local officials in New Orleans contributed to the disaster by forcing them to build less effective protection for the city than they originally wanted to build. The Corps of Engineers stated that they had proposed a plan which was to implement gates at the mouth of the canals that could be closed as a storm approached. However, the city's levee board members and other officials pushed for an alternative design plan because they did not like the proposed plan. This resulted in the construction of several miles of levees and flood walls along the canals. Again, we see that ethics impacted the decision making. It was a question of who was going to pay and how much. But that was not the only issue. Local officials did not prefer the original designs due to influence by lobbyists to favor their interests.
The Corps of Engineers was the organization exclusively responsible for the design of the levee, as they were obligated by law to provide a solution to flooding after the events of Hurricane Betsy in 1965. They were overseen by the OLD, which is the Orleans Levee District, which collaborated with them in bringing their proposal to Congress and aided in the final solution decision-making process. Initially, the Corps was hesitant to assume responsibility for the levee failure, but as public pressure built on them, they were forced to accept it on April 5, 2006, when Lieutenant General Carl Struck testified before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Energy and Water, quoting that, "We have now concluded we had problems with the design of the structure." He also testified that the U.S. Army Corps did not know of this mechanism of failure prior to August 29, 2005. The Interagency Performance Evaluation Task Force was established by Lieutenant General Carl Struck to provide credible and objective scientific and engineering answers to fundamental questions about the performance of the hurricane protection and flood damage reduction system in the New Orleans metropolitan area. This committee was comprised of members associated with the U.S. Engineering Corps, creating a conflict of interest as the report omitted certain details which would have made the Corps more favorable in the eyes of the investigating committee. Several independent organizations, such as the American Society of Civil Engineers, created their own investigation reports, and their findings show that the Corps had purposely omitted certain findings which would have led them complicit in the engineering faults which were made due to cover costs.
When the chief engineer of the New Orleans District Corps of Engineers did the right thing and wrote a letter to the project manager responsible for the levee construction, stating that annual surveys would need to be conducted in order to detect erosion, it was totally ignored. This showed that the organizations involved chose to cut money rather than follow the correct and safe procedures. The company's ethics also took a drastic hit when a survey was eventually carried out after the damage of Hurricane Katrina. The warnings were disregarded, and this reflected drastically on the company and its employees. It also showed that they didn't value their employees' opinion. Knowing that New Orleans is a very hurricane-prone state, with at least a few hurricanes per year, it was obvious that the levee system would need to be up to standard, or even better, to ensure a healthy level of safety. This important factor was disregarded by the engineers, and the levee system was never 100% complete. Taking all these factors into consideration, it was clearly noticed that the ethical orientation of the Corps was at fault.
Fred Chachery, the chief engineer of the Corps of Engineers, approved a plan to widen the channel to help with drainage. However, while developing these plans, Fred Chachery wrote a letter to the project manager responsible for the levee construction, stating that dredging of the New Orleans side of the canal would cause erosion, which could lead to failure of the levee once constructed. Due to this concerning factor, he directed the project manager to do annual surveys of the canal bottom, which is required to detect this erosion. However, the annual surveys were never done. The New Orleans District and Darlene's Levee Board said they didn't even know about the surveys. It was like Fred Chachery's letter was filed into the unnoticed and unread section. It's alarming that no one checked for erosion, but only after the damage has been done by Hurricane Katrina, and was brought up in a US Senate hearing in December 2005. However, there was one survey of the canal bottom done post-construction, and it could have told the local levee district and the Corps that something was not right. But no one did nothing. No one noticed. If anyone looked at the survey's drawings, they would have seen the problems developing. But instead it was ignored, and no further surveys were done until 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. On the opposite side of the canal, there was so little information that the Corps' own investigators weren't even sure that if that dredging was done. Their own values clearly undermined their own organization and code of conduct.
This levee failure did not occur because of the design flaws alone, but because of a series of faulty decisions driven by some shady morals from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. These decisions involve compromising the safety and reliability of the New Orleans levee system, just in order to reduce cost and manipulate scheduling of the project. A good example of this is when the engineers chose to model its system on what is defined as a standard project hurricane, which incorporated the most severe parameters that were reasonably characteristic of the region, but in reality, the engineers chose data from the lower end of the spectrum. Going even further, when the National Weather Service later raised its projected maximum wind speeds, the USACE failed to update its design to match the new data. These decisions, in combination with the design flaws, increased the destruction caused by Hurricane Katrina.
Experts found that the damage and deaths caused a decade after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans could have been prevented had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers retained an external review board to double-check its floodwall designs. It was found that the main fault in the flood walls was the misinterpretation of a full-scale load test. After these tests, it was determined that the flood walls in the city should be installed at a depth of 17 feet instead of the initially estimated depth of 31 to 46 feet. The flooding that killed 1,836,000 people in New Orleans and caused billions of dollars in property damage could have been prevented had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers retained an external reward to double-check its design of the new flood walls.
After countless hours of preparation, calculation and hard work of numerous engineers, the actions conducted to save an initial $100 million has ended up with a loss of over $78 billion due to poor engineering judgment by USACE over 50 failures of the levees. It destroyed or rendered uninhabitable 300,000 homes, resulting in casualties and life-threatening effects on victims, leaving in its wake 118 million cubic yards of debris. Engineers from the corps did not say that their decision was best, and instead allowed the local board members to influence their decision. While extremely disappointing, the damage has been done. The levee's failure provided an inviting backdrop for reflection. Many engineers must confront failure at one point or another during their career, and whether that occurs during tertiary education or while launching a SpaceX rocket, learning how to fail and reflecting on why can serve to broaden our approaches and perspectives. In a journal article by Glenda S. Stump, Jennifer Hussman and Marcia Corby discussed that some students could view failure as a stepping stone to gaining knowledge and act as an indicator to try a solution through a new approach or to study harder, while others view their failure as a reflection of their low ability. They begin to doubt their capability for success. Their self-efficiency for learning and performance then begins to erode. Discussing these failures remind us to not only take necessary measures to avoid catastrophic failure in engineering as an ethical consideration, but to consider this time in school as an opportunity to fail. It is unique in that the failures we encounter now are usually only represented by a letter grade, and it can be vital to take those in stride to improve approaches and methodologies, as to avoid catastrophic failures in our steps outside of tertiary education and into this field. The experience of failure is a necessary part of the learning process, and while the New Orleans Levee failure is a bit different than failing a course in school, it reminds us to press on through the difficult times, and that taking failed results and learning from them to move forward boldly despite them. Although the failure is extremely costly and disappointing, be well prepared to take it in stride, improve on further iterations, and keep moving forward.